You might remember her from the football sidelines. Now she's in the political field. Michele Tafoya is our guest on Politics Friday as she runs for U.S. Senate. The former sports broadcaster joins us this hour to discuss her campaign. Michele Tafoya, you've been doing radio and podcasts for many years, so this might be a more familiar environment than the campaign trail for you.
I feel right at home in here. I do.
Well, just tell me, how much of an adjustment is it to be on the receiving end of questions?
It's a big adjustment. This is a very different line of work, as someone once said to me recently, and it is. But you know what? You better be ready for this, otherwise you're not fit to run. So it's fine. It's what I expect, and I welcome it.
Well, I first heard your name associated with Minnesota politics when you spoke to state college Republicans at Northwestern College in April of 2013.
You remember that,
Well,
huh?
a political operative told me then that he saw you as being on the radar after that. It took you 13 years to become a candidate. How come?
Well, look, it's taken me even longer than that. I was on the radar in my own mind before then, and it really started for me with 9/11. I was raised to believe that I was a lottery winner by being born here, and I still believe that very firmly. When 9/11 happened, it shook us all. And I thought to myself, wow, this freedom, this liberty that we all have is more fragile than I realized. And so for many, many years, I've considered this, have been asked to run, and now was just the right time.
Yeah, I last heard you in a serious way was in 2022 as potentially a lieutenant governor pick for one of the candidates back then. How close did you come to taking the plunge in that race?
Not at all. Not at all. I know those rumors were out there, but I wasn't close at all.
But in general, what drew you from thinking about being involved in politics to actually putting your name potentially on a ballot?
I think so many things. The fraud, the way I have seen Minnesota in decline, educationally, with the fraud, with the way that our state government, our governor, our attorney general, and the really entire administration has disrespected Minnesotans, letting billions of dollars go through their fingers and into the hands of fraudsters.
And I'm sure we'll get more into that, but
Okay.
Was there any hesitation entering politics in the caustic era we're in and amid concerns about politically motivated violence being on the rise?
Of course there are concerns. You don't get in this if you're squeamish. You don't get in this if you're, if you aren't ready to take that risk. So sure, yeah. But you know what? That if you're going to be a leader, you go into that. You walk toward it. You don't run from it.
So people who have come from the broadcast or podcast world have volumes of material for the opposition to mine. Are there things that you've said in that setting, in the prior settings, that you want to do over on?
I can't think of any off the top of my head. I don't know. I think I've been pretty true to myself. I'm an authentic person with beliefs and opinions, and I stand by them.
Well, we saw that in 2014 when Al Franken ran. Things he said were brought in a new light. Are you bracing for that to happen if you're the nominee?
Look, I'm bracing for everything. But again, if you're running and you're afraid, you shouldn't be running. You run with courage and you run with leadership and you run to take on whatever comes your way. I'm certain of one thing. People are going to go and mine that stuff and take plenty of things out of context or whatever they want to do. They've started dropping bombs on me already, verbal bombs. So, look, if you're not ready for that, don't get in.
Let's just shift to some of the issues because senators deal with a whole lot of things. And right now, one of the most pressing national issues is the war in Iran. And we're nearing 2 months since the U.S. bombarded Iran with missile strikes. Talks to the end of the war haven't been very productive as of yet. And polls suggest that the public is losing patience. Are you?
I would say this. Unlike some people on the other side of this argument, I am supporting our troops, our men and women who are over there fighting. I want the United States to have a victory here. I'm not rooting for the other side. I'm not rooting against this administration. I want America to be successful here. And so I understand it's been 2 months. I also understand we've done great damage to a regime that would like nothing more than to wipe us off the face of the earth.
Well, what's your bottom line when it comes to success in Iran? What does that look like?
Well, it's, look, we're all keenly aware of what this is doing to our pocketbooks, the fact that gas prices have risen. I'm a mom. I drive to see my kids play games. We all are feeling it. Success means ending that regime and getting them to a point where they say they will not have a nuclear weapon. I'd also, it's amazing to me that thousands and thousands and thousands of innocent Iranians have been slaughtered over there. And I don't see anyone protesting about that.
If that involves the U.S. sending ground troops in to either get nuclear materials or for some other reason, are you okay with that?
Listen, there are people that have far more information on what the ground looks like than I do. I'm not in a skiff. I'm not hearing these things. I'm going to support our armed services, our men and women in uniform, no matter what they have to do. I don't like that idea of boots on the ground, but I don't have that evidence in front of me of what needs to be done. What I will do is support this effort, support our warriors, support our troops, and really hope and pray for peace in the Middle East.
But Congress does control the purse strings.
Of course.
If the administration comes, is it an open-ended check, or where do you come down on how much should be devoted to this effort?
Well, I don't think it's a place for me right now to say what's the number. I don't have that information available to me right now. So I'm not going to quote you a number. I'm not going to quote you a time frame. What I'm going to do is support our men and women in uniform and support this effort to get rid of what has been a cancer for 47 years that no other president has dealt with seriously. And what I see are some shifting things in the Middle East that could shift to be very, very positive for everyone in the area, for everyone involved.
You referenced it. The Strait of Hormuz is basically stalled right now. The shipping traffic is stalled, and that has had an effect on energy prices here at home and around the world. AAA says Minnesota's average for regular is $3.74. That's up 27 cents from a month ago and 11 cents just this week. You've also talked about the need for sacrifice in the name of patriotism. Can you explain what you were getting at?
Yeah, look, this is we hope, a very temporary thing. I know that families feel pinched. My kids feel pinched because they're buying their own gas. They've got to pay for it themselves. Our family feels pinched. I know every family feels the pressure of this. And, of course, the increase in fuel drives increases in prices elsewhere. What I said at the time, which was weeks ago, when we thought this was going to be a momentary lift, was can we think about the people who are over there in uniform, risking their lives for this effort? Can we think about them and maybe just understand that this is a momentary bit of discomfort that we're going to have to feel for a long-term benefit? There are risks to war, and there are risks to not taking out this regime. There are risks when you leave a regime untouched that is building nuclear weapons, that has proven that they have the capacity to fire those weapons much further than they claimed, and that people in the neighborhood are in danger. There is risk to leaving that alone as well. So you have to offset those risks. You have to look at which risk is higher.
Which risk do you think is higher?
Well, I think letting a regime sit in power, continuing to build its nuclear program that chants death to Israel, death to America, and calls us the big Satan, and has done that for 47 years and continues to brutalize its own citizens, I think that risk is extremely high, and I'd like to see it put to an end, and I think that's what the end game is here.
All right, let's shift to the economy more broadly. How solid do you think the nation's economy is right now?
Well, listen, for all that's going on, you look at the market reaction, and the market seems to be okay with everything that's going on. But overall, I think things are not...
Not everyone's in the market, though.
I was about to finish. Overall, you're right. Not everyone's in the market, and there are a lot of people who are struggling. And I understand that, and I appreciate it, and I feel for everyone who is struggling. What I would say is I would point to, starting with, and I'll bring it right here to home. When you've got a government in St. Paul who is saying, let's go ahead and quintuple the price of car tabs because we need to raise more taxes, because we couldn't steward your money well to begin with. When they're saying we need more money for schools, when the schools are failing, when we have kids who can't read, 50% of our kids can't read at grade level or do math at grade level, and we need to keep shoveling money at that problem. When we have a government that can't run an affordable state and they continue to hike taxes on businesses and businesses are leaving, That, to me, is making a much tighter market.
On the national level, what's the recipe for improving the economy or improving the lot that people have right now?
There are so many ways to do it.
Just give me a couple.
Okay. Well, I think we have to look very clearly at healthcare. And the Affordable Care Act did not make healthcare more affordable. It is one of the most expensive things that people have to deal with. Of course, bringing down the price of gas, which will bring down the prices of a number of things. But healthcare is a big driver, and there are so many layers of unnecessary regulation in healthcare that need to be ferreted out of that system.
I'm glad you
keep looking like you want to interrupt
I'm
me.
glad you brought it up because I was going to get to healthcare. We've been hearing for years from Republicans that they want to pick away at the Affordable Care Act or even replace it, what they call Obamacare, or people call Obamacare. What would it be replaced with?
I think what we need is a system where it's much more transparent for patients and much more patient-oriented. What we've seen is that it's becoming much more corporate-oriented so that companies can purchase all of these healthcare providers and systems and make it paperwork-intensive so that the patients aren't the ones getting the most attention out of this. The corporations are. To me, it's like there is so much fat and waste and layered bits in that system that don't allow us transparent access to what we're actually spending on healthcare. What does it cost me to go and get a vaccine? What does it cost me to go and get a checkup? What does it cost me to go and get my kid's appendix out? What is that going to cost? And who is going to take care of what? You know what? Insurance, I think it's been a one-size-fits-all through the ACA, and that is not the way to insure a nation.
There was a government shutdown last year over this issue of premium subsidies for those exchange markets for people who buy their individual insurance in the private market. Those went away, and some purchasers saw their monthly costs shoot way up. Would you restore them in any fashion?
Well, look, I think that shutdown was more about who all is getting coverage. And there are a lot of people in this country, a number of Democrats, who want to cover people who are not here on a legal basis. That is driving prices up like crazy. So why are we doing that instead of taking care of the Americans who are tax-paying citizens first?
But on the topic of premium subsidies, do they need to come back in some form?
I'll look at that.
All right. The tariffs, the companies could start applying this week for refunds associated with tariffs that were invalidated by the Supreme Court. Should they face any obligation to pass some of that on to consumers, given that many businesses pushed up prices or added on fees when the tariffs were in place?
Listen, I think that tariffs are a good, useful tool when they can be used to make things fairer for the American people. I do not necessarily agree with tariffs across the board. As far as your question of whether or not that can be passed on to the consumer, each business is going to make its own decision as to how it does.
Do you trust that the consumers will see some of that?
I don't know. I really don't know. I'd have to watch and see how that develops and how businesses decide to handle that.
All right. So last week, the U.S. Senate voted to reverse a moratorium on mining leases in the vicinity of the BWCA. Was it the right call?
Yes, absolutely. Hands down, it was the right call. We can have two things be true. We can do mining in northern Minnesota around in the vicinity of the boundary waters without affecting the boundary waters. I trust Pete Stauber on this implicitly, and I believe in this wholeheartedly. Mining is it's a Minnesota staple, and it needs to come back. And if we can create AI, and if we can create life-saving drugs, and if we can send people into space to slingshot around the moon, we can mine cleanly as well. And people will have to jump through many hoops in order to have the privilege to mine, and they're going to be able to do it.
That project has kind of bounced back and forth, from being on the way to stopped, on the way to stopped. Are you confident that it's actually on the way again?
Yeah. I think that's why this happened. And I think that's why there was a lot of momentum behind this lifting of the ban.
You know this, the immigration issue was a big one in the early part of the year because of the agent surge in Minnesota. What do you think we learned from that?
Well, listen, I can't think back to that without thinking about the families that were affected by two deaths of Alex Preddy and Renee Good. That's the tragedy that came out of that. It was unnecessary. It didn't have to happen. I think what we also learned was there was a perfect storm that was brewed up. And part of it had to do, and I talked to people in law enforcement leadership who said they wanted to be able to help federal law enforcement, and they weren't allowed to. They were told to stand down. So I think there were clearly there was tragedy, and my heart goes out to those families and the friends of those two victims.
How might
it didn't have to happen.
How might it all inform how you approach the immigration issue if you get to Washington?
Well, listen, the immigration issue, I've said this all along, it's complex, it's nuanced, but there are some really straightforward things. No amnesty. We need a secure border. We need to end catch and release, and we need to continue with E-Verify to protect American workers. And there are people who are trying to come here legally and doing it the right way. We need to make that process clearer and simpler for those people who are trying to do it the right way. And we need to continue enforcement for people who are not doing it the right way. And that includes some deportations. It absolutely does. We need to make it clearer and simpler and more workable for everyone.
One of the side effects of the immigration was a U.S. Attorney's Office that saw a flight of prosecutors in association with some decisions that they didn't agree with, particularly as related to the shooting of Renee Good. Isn't that a setback in this fight against fraud?
Did all of those people cite that as their reason for leaving?
A lot of them did.
Okay. That may be the case. Of course, when you lose officers of the law, that's a setback. But no one's going to stop fighting the fraud in Minnesota. We have all been ripped off. All of us. It's federal money, it's state money, and for whatever reason, you're still driving over potholes because these government officials decided it was better to funnel that money off to criminals than to take care of their own state. This money that was supposed to go to kids for meals, for autism services, for seniors, that money never went to any of those people who actually needed it. It went to criminals, and it's ongoing. And it's upwards of $9 billion of all of our money. That is the estimate.
That's the estimate provided, but it hasn't been charged at anywhere near that degree.
You know what? That estimate is there. Some estimates go double that. The point is, every single person listening to us talk right now was stolen from. And when you look at your paycheck or when you look at your tax return and you look at how much you spend in taxes, and things around you are still in disrepair, and kids were not helped, you should be angry, and you should be holding our government accountable. We will do everything we can to hold the right people accountable.
I want to move to an issue that is important to a lot of GOP voters who will be at the convention coming up and who might vote in the primary. It's abortion, and your stance on abortion has come up in this GOP race. Can you clarify whether you want to keep the procedure legal, or would you try to take steps toward outlawing it?
I will not take steps toward outlawing it. What I will do is vote against taxpayer-funded abortion. Again, I care about the taxpayers a lot, and, so against taxpayer-funded abortion always. For conservative judges. Look, this is an issue that matters to a lot of voters, but it is a state's issue. I'm running for a federal office. This is a state's issue that it's been codified in Minnesota. If it's going to change in Minnesota, it's going to be the Minnesota governor and legislature that does it.
An emerging issue right now that a lot of people are paying attention to is these prediction markets. You come from the sports world where leagues were sensitive to betting on games and word about players or coaches using insider information. Congress is trying to figure out how to do something about insider trading as well. What do you think needs to be done?
Well, unfortunately, because I'm not a lover of regulation, but when it's a really interesting time when we heard about this case with this armed serviceman who earned $400,000, earned it by predicting that Maduro would be in custody because he knew he was part of the planning operation a month ahead of that. That's insider trading. That's illegal. So there certainly, and we know there's insider trading going on at a lot of different levels in a lot of different industries, and that needs to be fixed.
So you want to tighten the clamp some?
I would like to look at that.
All right. What's your assessment of how President Trump is doing so far in the second term?
There are a lot of things that this president has done that I'm very pleased about. The border security is number one, and I talk to delegates all over the state who are grateful for that. They feel safer. Crime is down nationwide. We're happy about that. Prescription drug prices are coming down. Some even came down again this week. Another company joined into these most favored nations agreements with the United States. That is a positive. I appreciate him standing up for girls' sports as someone who benefited from Title IX on multiple levels. And I would even say that I would not have had the career that I was fortunate enough to have if it hadn't been for Title IX. I'd like to preserve Title IX the way it was.
The way you start off that sentence, there are a lot of things. It sounded like you were going to get to a but. Are there any things that you're less satisfied with?
Well, I probably wouldn't debate theology with the Pope.
One of your GOP rivals, David Hand, has brought up comments that you made discouraging Trump from running again after the 2020 election ended. Can you address what you said then?
That was 2022. That was 4 years ago. And in a Substack post, I wrote about all the accomplishments, including the Abraham Accords and others, and bringing down inflation, et cetera. Wrote about those issues. But at the time, there were a lot of candidates, including Ron DeSantis, who had just been reelected as governor in a hands-down fashion. And I thought, you know what, maybe it's time for a change. And so I wrote that. I'm an independent thinker.
Would you retract that?
No.
Okay.
I mean, look, I'm glad I voted for Trump 3 times. I'll tell you that quite plainly. The alternatives were not appealing to me at all on the other side. So I voted for Trump 3 times. I wrote what I wrote. I believed it then, and I stand by my opinions.
NPR News reported yesterday about a no-contact order involving Royce White to stay away from his ex-wife and son. Does that trouble you?
Anytime there are hints of domestic violence, I'm troubled.
And so he's planning to be at the Republican convention next month asking for the Senate endorsement. The party backed him 2 years ago. Should he remain a candidate?
I'm going to leave that up to him and the party.
But you're going to the convention. Are you going to abide by that party endorsement?
I am going to the convention, and I've made it very clear I want to win this endorsement.
But if you don't?
I've also made it clear from the get-go. Look, I have been honest about this. They endorsed Royce White 2 years ago. So I'm going to go through to the primary. We have a primary for a reason, I think. I mean, we have a scheduled primary. If I believe I'm the best candidate remaining, I'm going to go to the primary.
The National Republican Senatorial Committee donated heavily to you in your first quarter fundraising. Are you the candidate of Senate leadership?
I believe so. I mean, Tim Scott has endorsed me. Rudy Boschwitz has endorsed me. I feel very proud of those. I've received a number of letters of support, calls of support from a lot of senators. But listen, that's not why I'm running. That's not why I'm running. I'm running to help Minnesota get back to the place of common sense. Period. The end.
How often should we expect you, if you're the nominee, to debate the DFL nominee?
I would say as often as they like.
Well, the invitation will be open here.
Excellent.
Michelle Tafoya, a Republican candidate for U.S. Senate, we appreciate you coming in.
Thank you.
Our next guests have their fingers on the pulse of both fronts. Preya Samsundar is a Republican consultant who has worked on several levels of Minnesota politics. I think she's gearing up for a busy fall.
Thanks for having me.
And Ubu Amara is a former Democratic legislative advisor who does dabble in campaign circles occasionally. Ubu, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with the conversation I just had with Michelle Tafoya. What stood out, Preya?
I think she's got teeth, and I think that's incredibly important when you're thinking about a very contentious race. I mean, the reality is simple. Like, National is paying attention to this Senate race in Minnesota this year. We've seen a number of flips in terms of predictions for whether this race is a toss-up. I think just looking at the Democrat side and the Republican side, folks are very interested, and I think Michelle Tafoya has brought a lot of that attention to this race. I think also that we just need somebody who's going to be able to go toe-to-toe with some of these Democrats. We haven't really seen that kind of bite in the last few candidates over the last few cycles. I think she's ready to bring the heat, which I think is incredibly interesting. And, if she is the candidate, could prove to be a very interesting general election cycle.
Abu, anything jump out to you?
Well, I think two things. One is that she's out of step actually with the Republican base. You asked her questions about abortion and how she's going to explain that with delegates. Really wasn't a good answer. She's really taking a Democratic position when it comes to abortion, and she's out of step with Minnesotans. People just went through Operation Metro Surge. There's serious pain, not just about the democracy, but the pocketbook, and there really weren't explanations on those two things. And so I think she's really going to struggle to find who her coalition is going into November.
Well, Preya, I was skimming through her fundraising report, and a sizable haul came from a who's who of the old school GOP in Minnesota rather than the firebrand world we see today that gets so much attention. Is that her calling card?
I think that she's got an opportunity to coalesce a wide base. I think a lot of us forget that Michelle Tafoya was a household name long before she got involved in politics. Very well known in the state by normal people. And I think that is what draws some of that attention to her. It's kind of like, it kind of reminds me almost of like Jesse Ventura-esque, right? Having that notoriety, that celebrity, even before getting into the realm of politics, so that everyday people feel confident that she's got a shot to win, which is something that that name, built-in name ID, we haven't had candidates with that kind of level of notoriety and that name ID and household names across the state in a very long time.
Abu, do you think she can connect with the MAGA base, and does that matter? Does the MAGA base help you or hurt you in a general election in Minnesota?
Here's the thing. It's necessary to get to the primary, but it is insufficient to actually win a general election. And that's part of the problem here. Unlike era of Tim Pawlenty or Jesse Ventura, in that era, we're in a hyper-partisan environment. And so what that really means is once you step in your team R or your team D, you're really taking on the dynamics of that party. And what is the fundamental atmospheric in this election? It's Donald Trump. And that is something that's very unpopular here in Minnesota, and that's going to be problematic for her.
We certainly appreciate her coming in because she hasn't done all that many Minnesota media interviews. She's popped up on radio stations and podcasts elsewhere. What do you make of the strategy?
I think she's trying to reach a very wide base and a wide audience. She's trying to nationalize this race, which again isn't something that's been done for far too long. I think she has the opportunity to coalesce to a wide range of voters. And to touch on Abu's point here for a quick second, we see states like Wisconsin, we see states like Michigan where they have been able to walk the tightrope. That is, how do you run as a Republican in a MAGA environment where a general election base might not necessarily feel the same way about the president that our convention base does? We've seen that pathway take shape in Wisconsin, in Michigan, and other blue states. I think she's kind of following that path a little bit. And I think to talk about the abortion point here for a second, this isn't 2022 anymore. Dobbs has been passed. The Supreme Court
Still
has
a big
spoken.
motivator for a lot of voters.
It is, but at the end of the day, her answer wasn't incorrect. Like, she has nothing to do with it from a U.S. Senate federal standpoint. This is now a states' rights issue. And so she's got to focus on other things of importance, like the economy, like trade, like healthcare, like immigration, and so much more.
But when it comes to media strategy, the same about not doing many interviews could be said about Amy Klobuchar in the governor's race. It seems like we've had these peekaboo campaigns this year.
Well, I think there's two entirely different candidacies. One, Amy Klobuchar is a known commodity. This is a person Minnesotans have engaged with for 20 years. Michelle Tafoya is someone who nobody's heard of in a political context or had conversations to flesh out her positions. And just to the point about abortion being done, that's just not true. There's a bill in Congress right now to codify Roe. The question is going to be, what is her position? Is she going to vote to codify Roe? That's why this conversation is going to continue at the federal level. So I think the strategy around the campaigns should be expected. Amy Klobuchar is a known commodity who's been vetted for 20 years. That is not the case with Michelle Tafoya.
At what point does she have to answer questions about what she wants to do as governor, which is a different set of issues than what she deals with in Washington sometimes?
Well, let's remember, she got into the race, I think, 2 months ago.
Right.
And so there's going to be time to build up this campaign. I suspect going into the delegate conversations, that those stuff's already happening. But I suspect the conversations around policy are really going to pivot after the convention.
I think the reality is, you're talking about Amy Klobuchar, who has been in office, to your point, for 20 years. She is by definition a career politician. Minnesotans should know a lot about her, but the reality is the mask was pulled off when she ran for president. We found out a lot about who Amy Klobuchar was during that 2020 presidential election. It's why she lost as much ground as she did against someone like Royce White. When you look at the reality is, when you look at her voting pattern or her success since 2006 when she first ran, she has lost ground with folks in Minnesota every single year, and that's because the mask continues to be pulled off election cycle after election cycle.
Brief response.
The fact is she's undefeated in elections, and I think Republicans know that. They're the dog that caught the car. They wanted to run against Tim Walz, but once he stepped out of the race, they realized, oh, wow, we really can't win this race for governor.
Priya, you brought up the name Royce White. The Republican Senate candidate was on a podcast this morning saying he's the victim in a situation where he's the subject of a no-contact order involving his ex-wife and son. We have a lengthy story up at nprnews.org. People can check that out. Bray, I know you've tangled with Royce White in the past campaign role, but he does have a devoted following with the base. Would you expect this to diminish his standing at all?
I think the reality is that voters got a very good look at who Royce White was in 2024. They saw the grift for what it is. The fact that he's using campaign cash now to fund issues within his personal life is a shock to absolutely no one. I think that's the reason why you're seeing folks like an Adam Schwarzy, like a Michelle Tafoya, who are gaining more ground with the delegate base this time around than in 2024. It's because people see Royce for who he is, an opportunistic candidate who's just looking to take advantage of clout and donor cash to maintain a certain lifestyle.
Abu, things like this used to be campaign enders, and they no longer are. How come?
Well, that's because Donald Trump has fundamentally debased, I think, the norms in our politics, and particularly on the Republican side. Don't get me wrong. There's wrong on both sides. It happens. We've seen it. The difference is what we've deemed acceptable now, I think, is fundamentally different. Royce White could never survive in a DFL primary. He would be outed. He would be shamed. But that's not the case with the Republican base. And I think this, whether you like him or not, Royce White speaks to a base in the Minnesota Republican Party that is undeniable. He has a coalition in a way that Michelle Tafoya does not.
Would either of you rule him out as a potential endorsed candidate next month?
Absolutely not.
I don't think he gets the endorsement of anything. I mean, I've heard rumors that he could, potentially be an LG candidate for a certain other candidate, but I don't think that individual gets an endorsement either.
You're being very hinty here, but he has been traveling the state with Mike Lindell, who is running for governor. I don't know if that's what you're getting at, but Abu, how much will this disclosure about State Senator Matt Klein making a prediction market wager on his congressional campaign have on that second district primary?
Look, I don't think it's a good look. In a race where you had a fairly competitive three-way race, it's fodder for the other candidates. And so I think ultimately, will voters care? I think on the margins they might, and it might push voters away from him, I guess I should say.
Pray, wouldn't it have mattered more if he had wagered on someone else and then purposely tanked? I mean, he still needed a lot to go right for his $50 wager to pay off.
Honestly, I still don't know what exactly to make of it. I mean, I kind of laughed when I saw the story pop yesterday. And I think it's just the reality of this, of what we're dealing with in the kind of environment that we've got right now in politics, which is you kind of look at a story like this where a candidate has bet on himself to get into a race, gets into the race to make money off of him, and we kind of just sit there and chuckle. And I think
his bet was to win the primary. Whatever it is. Okay, anyway,
I think whatever it is, I think.
But that's okay. That second district race has been the main competitive U.S. House race in Minnesota for years. How realistic is it that the first district will creep onto the radar?
I think that Republicans
That's
have done
the one in southern Minnesota, by the way. Yeah.
Yes. I think Republicans have done a very good job of cultivating that area for so many years. The reality is that farmers and manufacturers, blue collar workers, they've left the Democrat Party. There is a very little within that voting bloc that now exists within the DFL for a myriad of reasons, mainly because they've just moved so far to the left compared to where that base was when they were voting generations ago. And so I think that Republicans, will it be competitive? Absolutely, mainly because Democrats think that they have a chance to win and are going to spend millions upon millions of dollars in that race, but not because their values actually will move things in their direction.
Two data points of why this is competitive. First, fertilizer costs are through the roof because of Donald Trump's war in Iran. Farmers in southern Minnesota are feeling it. And second, Donald Trump has a 28% approval rating when it comes to solving the economy on inflation. Those two factors, the economy is they're getting killed in southern Minnesota, and they're looking to Democrats to say, you know what, maybe I'll give you a second look.
All right, let's shift to the state capitol. Under 4 weeks to go, we've seen the practical list of items separate from the aspirational ones. How much of these last weeks are going to be about campaign table setting?
As someone who was at the Capitol, and at times we put up votes to make sure we had contrast votes for the fall, you're definitely going to see some of those. But I do think fundamentally the election is kind of set. I don't think there's a lot you're going to do, right? The atmospherics are what they are. You think a letter going in the mail is really going to move 10,000 voters? It's not. So I think at the end of the day, the election's really set here. And so the question is, what one or two policies are they going to get through? I think one of them is going to be Hennepin healthcare. Mm-hmm. I suspect there may be an opportunity to do a cash bill instead of the tax bill. That's been kind of the debate. I'm looking to see where that ends up going.
Priya, who has more writing on this final outcome?
I think it's Republicans, to be quite honest. I know that, we've got a split in the House. We've got, there seems to be a little bit of disjointment between House and the Senate right now. But it is going to be about how Republicans are leading. What, more importantly, did we get done on the fraud on the fraud legislation that we can point to in November that is really going to be the thing that I'm watching for.
Priya, if this governor's race does get out of hand, and I'm not saying it is, but if it does, do you think that the outside groups are going to turn their attention to the legislature where things are on a razor's edge?
I think that they already are. I mean, we've seen a memo come out from the RSLC out of DC, and they're like, Minnesota is one of their top targets. It has been for a couple of cycles, but they're putting it right up there with Michigan. So I think folks are already looking at this legislature. They're looking at how razor thin it is. They understand what is at stake, and they're already making their plans for this fall.
By Labor Day, Republicans will cut all their money except for the 1st congressional district, the 2nd congressional district, and the state legislative races. They're going to give up on everything else.
Who's in the conversation for the Klobuchar running mate?
I mean, I've heard a couple of names. I think Tom Peterson, agriculture secretary, is a great guy. I know he's fantastic. I don't want to give away other names. I think there are conversations being had. How about that?
What do you think?
I probably am not the best person to talk about that.
Does it even matter?
I think people are more focused on who's going to be that top of the ticket, whose name they're going to have to choose on that ballot, right? Who's going to be the governor candidate? I think that's going to be what matters at the end of the day.
And just on that point, the historic nature of Amy Klobuchar's candidacy, I think it really doesn't matter who's lieutenant governor. Minnesota could have its first female governor.
Well, we didn't have time to get into the Tim Walz book. I know you'll all be lining up to be first to get it and read it next year. Right? Yeah. Okay. I got nods. Abu Amara, DFL operative and Twin Cities attorney, and Priya Samsudar, who makes her living off of GOP politics. Thanks to you both.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.